You already know what time it is, man. The young goat in the building. Make sure you tune in to True Hill Heat Podcast.
What's up, guys? It's Wolverine Death Machine, Mr. GMSI himself, Brian Cage, and you're watching True Hill Heat. Who better? Nobody.
Hey everybody, it's Tony Schiavone of All Elite Wrestling, and this is True Hill Heat, and I said it right, you motherfuckers.
Hello, hello, hello. It is me, your True Hill Phenom SP3. We are live on the True Hill Heat YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter for our Who Killed WCW review, breaking down the Vice series produced by $7 Entertainment. Yes, the entertainment production company headed up by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And they decided to do a 4-part series on the death of WCW and determine who exactly killed WCW. I am solo here today. I decided to go live last minute, so you can excuse. I won't bury any of the True Hill Heat gang for not showing up and joining me for this. I wanted to get this out the way and do it, nice and slow burn, because we had a 4-part series. To pull back a little bit of the curtain, we thought about doing it, week after week, doing 4 reviews of the 4 parts. But after the first part, we realized that would be, a futile effort, and that we needed to do a full review of the 4-part series of Who Killed WCW. I am a longtime WCW fan. I would say around 1996, 1997, I would have called myself more of a WCW fan than a WWE fan. So I was very much looking forward to this, having a different perspective. We've seen so many WWE produced, WWE narrative produced versions of the death of WCW. I've read different books. I read The Death of WCW by Brian Alvarez and numerous other books about this company and its demise. So I was looking forward to this, and spoiler alert, it let me down. But we are going to be here to talk about it and to break it all down with all of you. And I decided to do this live, not even pre-recorded, because I was like, let's get it out the way. Let's get it to the people and let's talk about it. But we are here today. We're live on the True Hill Heat YouTube channel. It's a Saturday. We usually have the flagship podcast at 11:05 a.m. Eastern time, but join us tomorrow at 10:05 a.m. Eastern time, as we'll have the True Hill Heat flagship podcast with myself, Miss Chrissy Love, the True Jaw Josh, breaking down everything that went down this week, including Dijak leaving WWE, including the fantastic ending to last night's SmackDown. We're going to talk about that all tomorrow, but let's talk some Who Killed WCW. So if you're joining me live, I appreciate you. If you're watching on demand, I also appreciate you as well. Show that appreciation back the simplest way possible. Drop the thumbs up on this video. You can also share this video with all your wrestling fans, friends, and family on all your favorite social media platforms. If you're new to the True Hill Heat YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell to stay notified for all the great content here. But most of all, if you're watching us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, sound off in the live chat. I'll highlight as many of your comments as I possibly can as we break it all down we talk all about Who Killed WCW. Already see some good brothers already in the chat, like G Loke. Thank you so much, sir. Happy birthday to the good brother G Loke, our favorite Compton Crip here at the True Hill Heat YouTube channel. Always in the live chat showing his support. One of my good friends in real life, one of our best in the chat, who's always telling you to smash up the like, smash up the like, smash up the like. So happy birthday to you. He is, I'm not going to say his age, but he's young. He's very young, even though his bones are brittle. Love you, bro. Happy birthday. And we got one of our other good brothers, one of our other best in the chat, Vala B, who is back with us. He joined us live yesterday for our Forbidden Door preview. So if you haven't watched that, go out of your way to watch that before tomorrow's flagship podcast for sure. But we got Vala B, who's like member number 1, completes year 1. Yes, 12 months as a member here on the True Hill Heat YouTube channel. We thank you, sir, for your support, your ongoing support for sure. He says this might be top 3 most fed-washed documentary in WWE's existence, up there with the Monday Night Wars doc and the Ruthless Aggression doc. It is a fed-washed documentary, but it's not even done by WWE. Like Monday Night Wars and the Ruthless Aggression documentary had the benefit of being a WWE production. So for it to be fed wash, totally understandable. You want to dictate the narrative. If you win a war, the best thing that you could do is tell all the stories about the war and tell it in a way that always makes you look good, makes you look the best. That's totally understandable. But we were given a false narrative at the beginning before the documentary dropped, and it said you had people like Kevin Nash going on his podcast saying, "Oh, you know, this is going to be the real story. This is not going to be the WWE version of the story. This is going to be the real story." And we done wasted our fucking time. We got also Vala B. He says, "Bitched out for bitch off." Yes. We also got Vala B. He says, "I wonder what Dwayne has for bitch off." I don't know. He said he's one of his dearest friends, one of his longest friends. So that must be nice. We got AO Production joining us today. He says, next time do a Ruthless Aggression documentary. Yes, better off doing that. I'd rather hear the real story, quote unquote, real story of the Ruthless Aggression than WCW for the 50th millionth time. AO Productions also saying a majority of the speakers didn't want to take ownership or accountability. Yeah, it was basically, I saw the best tweet on this whole documentary after, like, I think the first episode, where shout outs to Trevor Dane put out a tweet where he said, "Who Killed WCW" is like talking to everyone that stabbed Julius Caesar, and they're all got bloody knives in their hand, and they were like, "Well, my stab wasn't the one that killed him. Well, my stab wasn't the one that killed him. So who the fuck killed him? Who the fuck killed him?" You got all these talking heads giving us different answers. The only one who's really saying how he really feels is Bret the Hitman Hart. Booker T kept it real, at least, as well. Shout out to the brother for keeping it real. Conan added some good bits of this as well. But everyone else, oh my God, they either don't remember what happened, they either remember their version of what happened that makes them look the best, or you have Kevin Nash, who was fine. He was blooded out. He had red, dilated eyes the entire freaking 4-part series. This was horrible. Like, that's the spoiler alert. I think that's the review. This was horrible. This is the worst wrestling documentary that Vice has ever done. And go back into our archives. We've reviewed every single episode of Dark Side of the Ring. We've reviewed the China documentary that Vice did about her final days on Earth and documenting her. It was like a vlog type series with China. That was very well done. Dark Side of the Ring, it fluctuates from episode to episode if they have enough information about someone, if they have the right talking heads. But the quality of Dark Side of the Ring has been at a certain level. This was way below the Dark Side of the Ring level. And I don't know if the producers, the executive producers of Dark Side of the Ring who were involved in this can take any of the blame in that, or is this because it is a fed washed freaking documentary because Dwayne works with the WWE. He is on the TKO board of directors. So I don't know if this is even the same documentary that they planned on giving us before he got that position, but this was trash. This was really, really bad. This was not on the level of Dark Side of the Ring. This is not on the level of the China documentary. Hell, there are some WWE produced documentaries that are tremendously better and tell the truth and keep it real a lot more than this shit. That is my synopsis. If you don't want to keep watching, that is my synopsis of the whole thing before I break down each part of this series. But god damn, this shit was a waste of fucking time. This was a waste of fucking time. Spent 4 weeks, 4 hours of television for this shit. AO Productions says DDP still has heat for Jamie Kellner. Killed me. Yes, the fact that Jamie Kellner is passed away, RIP to him, prayers, condolences to his family. But it's kind of amazing that DDP still has this much aggression and hatred for him. He's passed away, dog. You won that war. You won it. We got AO Productions, who also says it was probably Dwayne's idea, I bet, since $7 is involved. Yeah, it was Dwayne's idea to probably do this, which in general, I don't think we needed another WCW documentary. WWE did the rise and fall of WCW documentary, which was it was just basically them shitting on WCW the entire time and downgrading, diminishing anything they did good, whether it be NWO, the signing of Hulk Hogan, Goldberg, the Sting character. They diminished it and just was like, it was good, but it was good, but it was good, but. So at least we got that. At least that was the only part I could say this documentary did better than the WWE produced documentaries on WCW, but it's a fucking time. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna break down each part of the series, and you guys can sound off in the live chat. Like I said, I'm going to try to highlight as many of your comments as possible. But of course, if you're feeling generous and you want to give me some peace of mind for spending time on a Saturday talking about this shit show, please send a super chat donation so I feel better, so I can tell my missus, hey, I had to talk about that trash series that I didn't even want to get her through watching it. We usually watch Dark Side of the Ring together, and I was gonna say, hey, let's watch this together because she was not a WCW kid. She didn't watch WCW as a kid. She was more WWF for obvious reasons. I've said it in the past who her family is. So obvious reasons why she watched WWF a lot more and never really watched WCW. She likes watching old WCW with me and being like, oh, that's where they went. Oh, that's where they went. So I wanted her to watch this. But after watching the first one, I was like, I'm not going to put you through this. I'm not going to put you through this. So episode 1, which was entitled Where the Big Boys Play. You start off with behind-the-scenes footage of the final WCW of March of 2001. Eric Bischoff wonders what he would say if he had to give the eulogy for WCW, and we get a quick flash of all the talking heads and what they would say from Medusa, Booker T, Bill Goldberg, The Rock, Conan, Kevin Nash, and Bret the Hitman Hart, who had the best line. And this would become a common theme whenever Bret was on screen. He had some of the best lines of this entire series. Bret Hart, spoiler alert, he's a candidate for MVP of this entire series. He says, fuck you, thanks for nothing. There's only one Bret the Hitman Hart. Eric Bischoff is here, and he takes us back to the 80s and the 90s and how media referred to wrestling as just the WWF. He notes WCW was if it was a different universe back then from where the WWF was. He says everyone was happy to be a distant number 2 to the WWF except for him. He talks about the difference between where WCW was in 1993 to where it would become in 1998. They became the most successful wrestling company in the world, and almost overnight, WCW transcended pop culture. We get DDP, who I always like seeing DDP, and I love his work, DDP Yoga, but I can't say that he added much here because He is friends with Eric Bischoff. DDP says the NWO was the greatest faction of all time. Eric Bischoff says it's like we were standing on the mountain wondering how we got here. Egos, jealousy, and wrestlers being pathological liars are cited as reasons for WCW dying. Eric says it was a death by 1,000 paper cuts, which is a great line and does kind of. And I'm at the end of this, after I break down all four parts, I'm going to give you the WCW, Who Killed WCW blame pie, and what percentage all these people deserve of the blame pie. So stay tuned for that. The Rock says the question will always be, who killed WCW? Goldberg says, that's easy. It's Vince Russo. Dude, seriously? I can't even give Vince Russo 50% of this damn pie. It was on a fucking coma by the time Vince Russo comes. He responds, that's idiotic. Nash says that the lack of organization, and executive says the talent killed the talent killed WCW, which is very interesting as well. Booker T says it was the person with the checkbook, Eric Bischoff. Thank you, Booker T, for keeping it real, because not a lot of people were keeping it real on this shit. This was a glorified, and I put it in the headline here. This is a glorified. This shouldn't have been called Who Killed WCW. It should have been called How to Babyface Eric Bischoff after 25 fucking years. What the hell are we doing? Others says that there was too much blame to go around. Now we get into the proper show, and yes, that was just 5 minutes of the teaser to start off this thing. Eric says that back in the day before social media, there was an internet culture in professional wrestling, and fans had a desperate need to discuss who killed WCW. He says they ultimately felt that it was on him for WCW dying, and basically this was like his prologue of, here's all the reasons why I'm not to blame for killing WCW. Eric says that if he had to watch a tape that took him through WCW's journey from start to finish, he would do it in a heartbeat. He notes before working for WCW, he didn't even know what WCW was. That line got a big discussion going earlier in the day from multiple people across multiple platforms, especially Wrestling Observer, who have been talking about this throughout this whole series. And it's insane. It's insane to say that, because Eric Bischoff worked with the AWA before he went to WCW. So how the hell did you not know WCW, fam? Like, this is why he is not the best person to rely on to be our main narrator of what happened here, because his memory is completely shot. Bischoff notes that he was an outsider to the business, and he partnered with Sonny Ono to sell a game called Ninja Star. It was similar to laser tag, but you threw plastic ninja stars. They decided to run commercials in the AWA programming, and Vern Gagne agreed. Vern also offered Eric a sales job in AWA. Eric says he was always curious how television worked, and soon they put him on air as a TV host. He notes that he wasn't paid the last 8 to 9 months, as Vern Gagne wasn't making enough money. He had 2 babies at the time and needed to get money to provide for them. Larry Sabisco worked with Eric in AWA, and he offered him the move to WCW. He told Eric they were hiring for an announcer, and Eric was happy to be a third-string announcer behind the likes of Gordon Soley and Tony Schiavone. He came into WCW wide-eyed, as he knew he was now working for Turner Television, and Ted Turner was now his boss. We meet one of the executive assistants in WCW, Janie Elgar. Elgar says that Eric was very nice, but you could see he seemed uncomfortable. The talent was there with Ric Flair, Sting, Dusty Rhodes, and they had young guys like Kevin Nash and Scott Hall before they made the moves to WWF. We take some fun jabs at Kevin Nash as we go through the various gimmicks that he played. We even get some Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie footage, which I'm all for because it wasn't until probably when he was in WCW after watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 multiple times, because that was one of my favorite movies as a kid, that I realized that Super Shredder was Kevin Nash, that it was Diesel. Took me a couple of years, folks. Nash notes that he filmed the movie as he was cast as Super Shredder, and he thinks Dusty took some acid as he told them that he was going to be Oz. And he goes through the whole back and forth. Nash told Dusty that the movie was called The Wizard of Oz, and you could be the wizard, but Oz was the geographical region. This was great. You can tell Kevin Nash was high at this point. At this point of the whole series, I realized, Nash is high after filming this. He probably smoked some great Indo weed, and he was just high off his mind talking about all his memories of WCW. Nash buries the lime green suit, the old man mask, and he says, "You're going to wrestle a geographical region." He said, well, this is the same company that had RoboCop and Abdullah the Butcher in an electric chair. So not much that, not too far off, I guess. Bischoff notes WCW had a very loyal audience. They talk about how it was a Southern audience, regional in Georgia, and Guy Evans, who is the author of, I believe he's the author of the WCW Nitro Rise and Fall. I forget the name of the actual book that he wrote, but he provided some good footnotes, and he should have kind of been the narrator of this thing, because I feel like authors who study WCW and probably a media person, you needed someone like a Dave Meltzer, someone like a Brian Alvarez who wrote the Death of WCW book, to in this, because they would have helped with getting the actual facts down. He talks about how the WCW executives saw the WCW fans as downscale. That brings in Brad Siegel, who got ripped throughout this whole thing. And I mean, some of his smug comments for good reason, I guess. He was a former president of Turner Networks who says that the fans were downscale. He agrees. He didn't care about WCW and wasn't a fan of it. We also hear from Dick Cheatham, who was a group financial controller of Turner Sports. He says that 80% of the executives in Turner were not wrestling fans. And the ones who were, and the one who was, though, and the one that mattered the most was Ted Turner. We even see David Letterman footage with Ted Turner coming on the show. Bischoff says they called Ted Captain Outrageous. He knew people in the offices didn't like his wrestling, and that was part of the reason he liked it. Damn right, Ted. Fuck who. We always know True Heel started because we don't care what anybody says. We love professional wrestling. We keep it real about professional wrestling, and we say it with our chest. That's what makes us true heels. And Ted Turner is a true heel. Shout out to Ted Turner. Turner built a broadcasting empire, and a main part of the rise of TBS was pro wrestling, which made Ted loyal to it. Ted purchased Jim Crockett Promotions and turned it into WCW. They again note WCW was seen as the long-suffering kind of distant number two to the WWF. We jump to 1993, where Kevin Nash and Scott Hall jump to the WWF and become big stars as Razor Ramon and Diesel. They talk about the huge gap between WCW and WWF, and Eric notes that WCW was losing millions every year. Dick says the executives hated WCW so much, and they would alter the careers of people who were perceived as trying to help WCW grow in any way. Which, damn, that's not going to help you grow. That's not going to help your business at all. Only Ted wanted WCW around, while the rest never got the appeal and wanted the entire company shut down. That set the crazy relationship between the Turner Television and WCW that we would see how it would deteriorate through the 4-part series here. And they brought in Bill Shaw, and he informed everyone that WCW had to make a profit or Ted was shutting it down. And I love that, on Wrestling Observer, Meltzer called that line bullshit, as well as he noted that he would have heard of that by now. The idea was to hire an executive producer to take WCW from a wrestling company to a television company. And here is old Eric Bischoff, the superhero, with a cape on his back. As he comes in and he said that he saw that idea and knew his name was out there and was hired for the job a month later. And he says, what the hell am I going to do? So it sets the stage for Eric Bischoff, the great rescuer of WCW. We got TNC in the chat. Thanks for joining us, good sir. He says, watch this series and now give Eric Bischoff more credit for WCW success despite all the odds. TNC also says WCW wasted Bret Hart and could have done so much, especially Hogan versus Bret rivalry, which we never really got. Kind of crazy. Valabi says Bret has a lot of love in his heart as a person, just not for WCW and Bill Goldberg. Definitely not. And we would see it throughout this series. Yes, can never forget Super Shredder for sure. And we also got TNC who says, remember Nash and WCW in a tag team called Master Blasters? He had so many different tag teams, different gimmicks throughout his WCW run. They did not know what they had in Kevin Nash until he came back after becoming a star in WWE. Booker T is next up, and he says they came into WCW when it was a good old boy era, but Bischoff started to change that. Eric says his job was to change the look of the show, and he had the idea to shoot the show at Disney's MGM studio, where he could control the look and had a fresh audience coming in every few hours. And I love the studio era of WCW. You know, stuff like you've seen us on the channel, very complimentary of the first couple of months of NWA Power. Like my introduction to studio professional wrestling was WCW. I had to go back and see, Jim Cocker Promotions, NWA type stuff that had studio wrestling. But studio wrestling was introduced to me by Eric Bischoff and WCW. In 1994, Eric Bischoff gets another promotion and he's moved to vice president. Nobody thought WCW could be competitive with WWF. And Eric said, I need people. I needed Hulk Hogan. That's right. You always need Hulk Hogan, don't you, Eric Bischoff? Sucking at the teat. Kevin Sullivan says nobody would be here without Hulk Hogan. We talk about the awesomeness of Hulk Hogan in the 1980s. The Rock says it's finally here with a comment. And I think that the Rock contributions as a talking head amounted to about one paragraph, one standard school affiliated approved paragraph. He added like 6 sentences, maybe. He says Hogan was the one that broke pro wrestling wide open. As a fan or not, you knew the name Hulk Hogan. Nash says that Ric Flair is the greatest wrestler of all time, but the guy that was on Sports Illustrated is the guy, and that was Hulk Hogan. While they were shooting WCW at Disney, Hogan was shooting Thunder in Paradise, the great Thunder in Paradise. I remember that from watching Turner Broadcasting. So Hogan was out of wrestling for a bit as they touch on the steroids trial. They don't really get into that because they're like, oh, that's nothing to do with WCW, right? Right? They have Beavis and Butthead footage from when they were watching Real American and include the clip where Butthead is talking about Hogan taking steroids. Quality show. Beavis and Butthead. Without Beavis and Butthead, there would not be a South Park, which says a lot. Eric wanted to get a meeting, but Hogan didn't know him. So Eric went to Ric Flair, who did have a good relationship with Hulk Hogan, and he set up the call. Hogan called Eric in the middle of the night, and then Hulk Hogan eventually joined WCW in 1994, and the benefit was immediate. Just being associated with Hulk Hogan had people returning phone calls quicker. Eric says Hogan's original deal included 4 pay-per-views a year, and he had full creative control. His first mistake. Remember that. Eric Bischoff's first mistake as vice president of WCW was giving Hulk Hogan full creative control, which he had throughout his run in WCW. We see Hogan winning the WCW world title from Ric Flair at Bash at the Beach 1994. Bischoff notes that people could see that Ted was becoming serious about making WCW the top wrestling company. Teddy Turner, son of Ted Turner, says that his dad loved competition and he loved that Vince was assuming wrestling was his territory. We swing over to 1995, where Eric Bischoff says he had never had a one-on-one meeting with Ted. He went into the meeting that also included Harvey Schiller, his boss, and Scott Sass, who was seen as the heir apparent to Turner. Ted asks Eric, what would it take for WCW to be competitive with WWE? And we've heard this story from Eric Bischoff 1,000,001 times, and he shot back as he saw his life flash before his eyes. They are on prime time Monday night, coast to coast, and we can't be competitive with that. Ted told Scott to give Eric 2 hours every Monday night where they go head to head with WWE, and it's like, no, that did not happen, because WCW Nitro was only 1 hour its first 7 months. So I mean, if Ted told that to Scott and Scott said no, we're gonna give him 1 hour, I guess Scott was the real heir apparent and had some control in Turner more than we think. So this is once again another instinct, second instinct, where Eric Bischoff doesn't even remember his own stories. We move on. Eric walked out wondering how he was going to do this and said that with a legal pad, he started to write down ideas. They started discussing Monday Night Raw and its importance to television wrestling. Brad Siegel was not happy that Ted wanted to put WCW on TNT, as he viewed TNT as the premier spot, the premier network on cable, and he built it that way. He tried to fight Ted on it, but lost that battle. Siegel is just, he's not the best person. He doesn't seem like the best person at all. And his whole view of professional wrestling was very distorted. Meanwhile, Bischoff is trying to see what WWF is doing and what he could do different or better. He knew the one vulnerability is that WWF was taped every other week. So Eric wanted to be live every week. They had a block of action programming on TNT called Nitro. So Brad wanted to keep the synergy. And the only good thing it seemed that Brad Siegel did for WCW in its beginning stages before Nitro is come up with the name of Nitro. Eric was all for that, though he noted that they couldn't give tickets away. That is where he came up with the idea to do the first show at the Mall of America in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We get a brief rundown of the Mall of America and how it was a destination place. It is still the largest mall in the United States. Eric's hope was he would have enough people walking by, stopping to see what was happening to make the show look well attended. It worked wonderfully. If you go back to watch that first WCW Nitro, it looks like it was a packed house in the Mall of America. And it is, because it's the Mall of America, but they were there. Some people were actually there and watched professional wrestling. He knew they needed something shocking, so entered Lex Luger. He was just with WWF a few days earlier, but only on a handshake agreement. Eric notes that WWE had no idea and it set the tone for Nitro. We jump to Medusa and she talks about dumping the WWF women's title in the trash, and talked about Eric coming up with that idea and says that the magic of live, and that's what made them competitive. Back to Hogan, as some internet shows, they have been typing notes that Hogan is no longer the most popular guy in the company. Sullivan notes that in the U.S., we love to build people up and tear them down and see them rise again. The crowd still reacted to Hogan, but you can hear the boos. And thus, the game changer came. Scott Hall comes to WCW, and he introduces the start of the NWO. You know, a young me, I was like 8 years old. This was like one of the coolest things I saw as a kid. I love this era. We see Kevin Nash popping up, and the whole idea was that Razor Ramon and Diesel were invading. Booker says that it was something different. Eric says that they didn't tell the fans it wasn't an invasion, but they didn't tell them that it wasn't. When their first reaction was to think it was, we get Great American Bash 1996, and Eric Bischoff is powerbombed through the stage. I still smile seeing that clip. It's great stuff. Great stuff. And Great American Bash 1996 is one of the better shows pre-NWO for WCW. The story becomes, who is the third man? Meanwhile, Hulk Hogan is away filming a movie, and Eric calls Hogan and wants to head out to the set to talk about creative for his return. They meet, and Hogan asks, Who is the third man for Hall and Nash, brother? Eric says he has spent 3 weeks convincing Sting to turn heel. So Eric Bischoff, this is instinct number 3 of Eric Bischoff not knowing what the fuck he's doing. He wanted to turn Sting and be Sting, the third man. And come on, the obvious choice, if it's not Hogan, is Lex Luger. Lex Luger at this time was teasing a whole heel turn and was still heel, teaming up with babyface Sting. He was the obvious choice, but he wanted to give Sting, and he talked Sting into turning heel for 3 weeks. But he didn't want to tell Hogan that or lie to him, so he asked him who he thinks it should be. And Eric says, Hogan shot back, "You're looking at him, brother." And he's like, boom, mind blown. This is the time. And thus we get Bash at the Beach 1996. What a great show that was as well. Eric said he didn't want Hogan to go to the arena until the very last minute. So he stayed at Kevin Sullivan's house in Florida. They talk about babysitting Hogan in the back and basically trying to make sure that he didn't back out on this, and that he, in case he got cold feet. So we see that whole instance. Sullivan notes Hogan is a loyal guy, and there were risks in turning him heel as he had endorsement, movies, and his loyal fans. And Sullivan says they didn't leave his house until the first match started. Hogan arrived, and Bischoff still wasn't sure what he would do, and didn't even know when Hogan went out and walked to the ring. And it happens. Hogan drops the leg on Savage, and thus the NWO is born. Rock says he compares it to Babe Ruth telling the fans to stick it up their ass. We see the promo from Hogan afterwards, and the NWO takes off immediately and becomes the greatest thing in the history of everything associated with wrestling at that time. They hit everything out the park in the early days when it was just the 3 of them, Hogan, Nash, and Hall. We look at those crowds and the way they were reacting. There was just so much intrigue, and they were doing so cool stuff. We got one of them on Christmas 1996. Conan notes that there were still NWO shirts being worn today, and he doesn't see any other WCW shirts still being worn at that time. Bischoff notes that the ratings battle with WWF was even until the NWO. Once that hit, WCW went on a massive winning streak, and thus 83 Weeks is born and became the top wrestling promotion in the world. He says that the NWO was responsible for 80% of their growth at that time, and he needed to keep things looking real. We discussed the idea of backstage fights, and Nash says that they always looked fake as hell and oversold. And we go to one of the greatest angles in WCW history, the NWO at Disney MGM. The famous episode where Hall and Nash lay out WCW guys in the back. They note that they were inspired by Hill Street Blues in the way of filming what was happening. And the camera runs to the back, and we see Arn Anderson as my daughter comes in, and she's got a bandage on her mouth. You want to say hi to the people?
Hi, people.
There we go. Who killed WCW?
Where's the people?
Yeah, there's the people.
Where's the people gone?
The people are watching us.
Where's the people?
Yeah, the people are watching us.
Where's the people?
They're all watching us right now. It's just us talking.
Where's the people?
They're out there watching. Okay, you want to go to mommy?
Yeah.
Okay, go to mommy. Go to mommy, and I'll finish. I'll be finishing in a quick. We'll give them the spark notes here. But yes, so they're 83 Weeks is born. They're on top. We get the great angle with them attacking at MGM Grand, and then the story progresses as we go into still in 1996. Eric says that he heard that Vince planned things a year out and worked backwards from Mania, and he wanted to do something similar and saw the opportunity with Sting. Hall had the idea for a new version of Sting based on the Crow, and that is where the new Sting character was born. We get the little vignettes and the start of the whole Sting angle and how he was kind of like the Batman to the NWO's villains. And then we go to Starrcade 1997, which is still to this day one of my least favorite shows to rewatch and go back to, because this should have been the culmination of a wonderful 18-month arc. of WCW versus NWO, of Sting as Batman representing WCW, fighting against the overpowering, outnumbered group of villains in the NWO. And Eric says the plan was for Sting to beat Hogan for the world title, and then the NWO was going to be the ones that needed to regroup. You can enter. That don't work for me, brother, here, because it did not work for Hulk Hogan. Eric says the finish got convoluted throughout the day. The ref was supposed to do a fast count, but that didn't happen. Yet Bret Hart had to act like it was one. Bret thought that it was a lame ending, even if the count was fast, and I agree. Bischoff notes that the crowd reacted how you wanted them to initially, but afterwards, people realized that it was a convoluted finish. No, we realized right then and there. Even me, I was 1997. I was like 9 years old. I realized that was convoluted. I was like, what the hell just happened? DDP says you can crew up the whole match, but don't fuck up the finish. And that's what they did. Time to blame the internet fans again, though, because Eric can never take blame for anything. He says they all raged about the finish, and he still gets crap today for how that show ended. Eric says that on the day of the match, Sting did not appear nearly as excited about the opportunity as they felt he should be. So now it's Sting's fault. Fourth time Eric Bischoff's done pissed me off, and crucial mistake of how we killed WCW here. I'm not even going to go through all 4 parts anymore because I'm getting a headache talk about this first part. There was something about him, he says, that was off. Eric asked Hogan, and he said, not today, brother, not today. His head's not right. What? He made the change? So they changed the clean finish as Hogan had creative control, going back to one of Eric's crucial mistakes as leader of WCW, despite him not wanting to take blame this entire fucking time. Conan says the only guy that wasn't political in WCW that was a top star was Sting. Bischoff says Sting expected Hogan to pull the rug from out under him and manifested it. So it's Sting's fault. It's Sting's fault. Booker says that when the ship started going down, and I agree with Booker. That's why I said Booker was very, very well spoken here and kept it real. Bischoff says Starrcade 97 will haunt him for the rest of his life. He says the show wasn't the reason WCW went downhill, though. Okay. Over in the WWF, they started to turn things around with the Attitude Era. Eric says that Vince basically admitted that they were going to do what those other guys are doing because they are tired of getting their asses kicked. Nash brings up Mike Tyson showing up, and he was like, how can you compete with that? In other words, he says that we are on our way to the iceberg. Conan says he thought Rock and Austin were cool, and he and Disco would watch Raw backstage, and he yelled he was doing it because their show was better. And everyone jumps on the Hogan-Bischoff relationship, and you don't have to beg Bret the Hitman Hart to take shots at Hulk Hogan. He calls Hogan the puppet master, and says that Eric was a prop, and that's what killed WCW. Thank you, Bret the Hitman Hart. Actually, I'm shocked he didn't blame Goldberg here, but hey, nonetheless. Bischoff says he looks at the high-ranking executives in Turner, and that wanted WCW to go away, and they got their wish. There you go. We got Valabi in the chat who says, hey, Harlem, shouting out my daughter here. We got some hellos for Harlem as well. Yes, Cyclops, she was censoring herself. She was like standards and practices for WCW. The nice little play. I like how she played in on what we're talking about here. But this first part, this is where I changed our plans for covering this whole show, because I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna cover this week to week, because that first part pissed me off so much. I don't know if I can go through everything else, like beat by beat, part by part. Yeah. Yeah, it's just frustrating because Starrcade 1997 is the starting point of the iceberg. That's when they saw the iceberg changing before their eyes, and they didn't do anything. They had a star in the making in Goldberg still around that time. That's when the start of the Goldberg run was happening, even at Starrcade 97. He had a matchup against Steve Mongo McMichael, and they had him on that undefeated streak, but and 98 was their most profitable year because of their success in 1996 and 1997. But it's like, Jesus, like if you can't take blame for that and the fact that Hogan had creative control being a big mistake of you as a leader, then I don't know what to tell you, bro. I don't know what to tell you. We got Valabi says Starrcade 97 itself is a mystery. I agree. We got TNC Cooper who says, I bought Starrcade in 1997 on pay-per-view and thought the finish was messed up. I was only 9 years old and I knew that finish was totally fucked. It was totally fucked. And we were in for some long days ahead. We got Alex Powell who says, what was the difference between this doc and the Monday Night War? Okay, what am I looking at? Nice. Oh, you got Superman candies. My daughter's gonna keep interrupting me, so I can't go through all three parts of this. So, I'll give you the cliff notes for part two. But Alex Powell says, "What was the difference between this doc and the Monday Night Wars doc that WWE did? It was WWE narrative. WWE narrative of, yeah, let's talk about all the success and the things they did good, but let's also emphasize more all the stuff that went bad there." Like Goldberg, the rise of Goldberg. But he wasn't a good wrestler, and his streak ended real quick. NWO, they were great on the rise, one of the greatest stables ever, but also they had too many members, and it sucked after a while. It was just downgrading everything. I will say they highlighted the successes of WCW a lot better in this documentary. Alex Powell says SP3 needs to start a show with a guitar and says, "What y'all drinking?" Absolutely. This is what I felt like watching this. We got follow me. It's like, let's come back next week. Then if you don't have a co-host, I'll jump in. Don't suffer this shit alone. No, I need to put myself through this pain, Valabi. I do. I'm a glutton for punishment. I do it for all of you, for your enjoyment. So send a super chat donation so I feel a lot better about myself. Cyclops is better than Wolverine says, I just remember stop watching WCW around 7th grade when Master P and the No Limit Shoulders showed up. I was strictly WWF after that. Hey, I enjoyed Rap is Crap. Good times. Good times. So part two of this series was The Streak is Over. Eric says by 1997 they had a lot of goodwill, and for 83 weeks Nitro beat Raw in the ratings, and then boom, Eric gets a phone call from Harvey Schiller, president of Turner Sports, and informs him that Ted wants another wrestling show on Thursdays, and thus we have Thunder being born. 1998, Thunder debuts on TBS, who want the show, but don't want to have the budget, don't want to pay for the budget for it. So Eric instead is paying it out of WCW's budget. Mistake number 5 by Eric Bischoff in control here. Eric says he needed each show to have unique talent. So a type of brand split, if you would. He innovated it. So he brought in Bret the Hitman Hart. We get to Bret, who knows that he was at top of WWF. He beat Undertaker for the title. He beat Stone Cold Steve Austin. Kevin Nash says he had some of his best matches with Bret and has a ton of respect for him. Conan loved Bret and called him a national hero in Canada. Booker T talks about emulating some of Bret Hart's moves. And Bret says Bischoff got up to $2.8 million a year. So he joined WCW. Take that paper, Bret. I ain't mad at you. He needed an anchor for Thunder, and that became Bret Hart. Bret notes that he got a great reaction his first night, but it went down from there. He talks about being flown down from Calgary to TV, and they wouldn't use him. He would sit in the dressing room and do nothing. Eric apologized to him, but Bret says that everything Eric said was a lie. Mistake number 6 from Eric Bischoff in control. He got Bret the Hitman Hart and didn't know what to do with the hottest version of Bret the Hitman Hart coming out from Montreal and getting screwed by Vince McMahon and WWF. He did not know what he wanted to do with Bret Hart. Jesus Christ. The Talking Heads talk about being spread too thin, and they had to book 10 hours in 2 days, and they killed any attention to detail. We see stuff like Giant destroying the ring while Hall was just selling it and collapsing in on him. I remember it looked cool. Eric says that the NWO is still printing money, and they doubled down, and they made the red and black NWO and the LWO. Bret says all the matches were the same, and every show would end with 20 guys running in, and that is absolutely true. And he says they lost their momentum and found themselves in rebuild mode. April 13th, 1998 is the official end of 83 weeks straight of Nitro beating Raw. And it's with Raw teasing the Austin McMahon matchup. They're right in the peak of Austin and McMahon, and they're riding that peak all the way through to like 2000, which is crazy. Brad Siegel says there were reason for concern, but numbers were still good, and each show continued to push each other. Thus, then came Goldberg. Goldberg becomes this huge star. We talk about the background of Goldberg, we get Goldberg coming in. He says, "I am the character. I am Goldberg." Eric isn't sure if there had ever been a performer, athlete, wrestler that rose as quickly as Goldberg. They talk about, his football career, and he was depressed, and he figured he needed to give wrestling a try. Sullivan says that he gave Goldberg the short black boots and tights, and he made it so he didn't talk, and this was all based on Mike Tyson in the 80s, and Goldberg just destroyed people. He was squashing people, and Eric says, "Why would you mess with that?" Sullivan says there was jealousy, and we jump to Nash, who says Bill's a fan, Bill's a mark, Bill's a football player. Bret says someone should have pulled Goldberg aside and told him it was pretend. Nash says this is a fucking television show. Goldberg said that, there was a bunch of haters. He feels bad about it, but as long as the intent is not there, it's not his fault. Nash says, get some skills, dude. Going in brings up the jealousy and how people didn't think Goldberg paid his dues. And Goldberg says they can kiss my ass. I will take that criticism on the way up because I am still that guy. Brad Siegel is even a big fan of Bill Goldberg. He hates wrestling, but he liked Bill Goldberg. Hey, there's that. And then Eric talks about the idea. He gets the call from Hulk Hogan, and he wants to wrestle Goldberg and put him over clean. I think that's the first time that Hogan's using his creative control to help someone else. But of course, it's a bonehead move. So bonehead move number 7, listening to Hulk Hogan, and Hulk Hogan was to blow one of your biggest matchups of Goldberg versus Hogan on national TV on a random Monday. They win the ratings. Goldberg wins the World Heavyweight Championship. Booker T calls that the height of WCW. That was the peak. Goldberg says that was the coolest shit ever. So hate on Goldberg, but hey, he put over Goldberg clean. Hate on Hogan, but he put over Goldberg clean as the sheet. The question then is asked, why wasn't this on pay-per-view? Eric says that he was criticized for putting pay-per-view quality matches on TV. Nitro was bringing in the ratings, though, so there was no issues. They really didn't give any answer as to why they did the match on pay-per-view. So there's that. We haven't heard from The Rock yet, but here he is, and he talks about his debut at Survivor Series again for some reason. He sees, it seems The Rock was the opening match and would be back in his hotel so he could watch Nitro. The WWF answer to the NWO was, of course, the Attitude Era. Bischoff calls it the Nitro Era as they took the Nitro format. Right? And we get all this leading to 1998, a record revenue year for WCW, but that didn't matter anymore. He was introduced to a different corporate structure in WCW, and he was told by 10 to 12 suits how he was going to operate WCW and the demo to go after kids and family. In comes Stu Schneider, former executive of former executive of Turner Home Entertainment, and Brad Siegel says each discussed the idea that they weren't going to be lewd like the WWF. Eric says WWF took what he did and did it better. Brett notes that Vince was happy to do all the things that Turner didn't want to do. They had Jenna Jameson on their show, says Kevin Nash, and our rebuttal was to give the guy an NWO shirt. And we see Dusty Rhodes in an NWO shirt. It's just like another bonehead move. So we're up to 8 from Eric Bischoff in control here. The fight took a toll on Eric, and he became a negative person. He found himself fighting departments at Turner and he never heard of, and it took a lot out of him. He was in his office, and Nash saw he was having a hard time, offered to temporarily take the book from him. Mistake number 9 from Eric Bischoff. So Nash regrets this, and he says he was just offering to help, and he should have just invited Eric to a strip club. Good point. Medusa notes that once you have basically the animals, the monkeys running the zoo, you are in trouble. Conan says that Nash was listening to all the guys that didn't have the best interests of the company in mind. Nash says that he didn't have any problem with Bill and was happy he was being pushed, but he had the belt too long. He had the belt 6 months. He won it in July. He would eventually lose it in December, and we see Nash beating Nash beating Bill Goldberg at Starrcade 1998. Another huge iceberg just erupted as you killed Bill Goldberg's character. There you have it. So Nash says, common fact, Wrestling 101, babyface always draws more money chasing the belt than having the belt. So that was his theory with taking the belt off of Goldberg. This leads to the finger poke of doom. As Nash, they advertise Nash and Goldberg, the rematch on Nitro, but they do this convoluted thing where Goldberg commits sexual assault to Miss Elizabeth, and he's arrested. So then the match is turned on January 4th, 1999. They're in the Georgia Dome, and the match is turned to Hogan versus Nash for the fight for NWO, the fight for the world title. And to just stick it to WWF because they had a tape show that would see Mankind beating The Rock for the WWF Championship. WCW has to take advantage of not being taped, and they want to create the illusion that there were issues with Nash and Hogan, but they also want to put a big bucket of cold water on what WWF is doing. So they have Tony Schiavone give the line, give the results, and the famous, that will put butts in the seats. And it did. The Rock laughs thinking about it, and Eric says a big chunk of Nitro's audience left, and he admits that it backfired on him in a huge way. First time he took any blame for anything in this whole 4-part series. Rock says that they got a little lucky that night, and it was a real defining moment. Nash says there were a lot of mistakes, but my check didn't change. That's all he cares about. Smoking that weed, smoking that Indo. And we talk about the finger poke of doom, and they basically try to blame the fans for the finger poke of doom and said, Nash says people hated it so much because it got them. Eric notes that WCW had chronic bad finish disease. That is one way to put it. Brad Siegel is asked if he is embarrassed by wrestling being so popular, and he tells them no, as they now have families going instead of guys of pickup trucks. That leads to a destruction. Wrestling is classy enough for Time Warner. WCW had prime territory on TNT, and there was a lot of people in Turner Sports that did not like that. We get executives blaming Eric for the big contracts he threw out and all the guaranteed money. Eric talks about ATM Eric and how that wasn't necessarily true. He was told by Harvey Schiller that he had been under a forensic investigation for misuse of funds. Someone threw out the idea that Eric was giving out millions of dollars in contract to wrestlers so he would get a kickback. I mean, might be something to that. The investigation proved that it wasn't true, but the idea that someone thought it was pissed off Eric, and he wishes that he would have quit right then and there. Bret says that there will always be bitterness about his time in WCW. He claims that they killed him off on purpose. That lets us jump a whole year later to Starrcade 1999, where Bret versus Goldberg, and we get the Bret and Goldberg back and forth here. Goldberg says that he told Bret to protect yourself. You knew the kick was coming. Bret says that it was never talked about or explained to him. Goldberg says nobody deserved that, but it was an accident. Bret says, no, Bill, it wasn't an accident. That is a career-ending injury, you idiot. it sucks for Bret, but shit does happen. Bret calls it a sad day, and he knew his career was over right then and there. Goldberg notes Bret's life was to be a wrestler, and he took that away from him. He has apologized and been remorseful, but he can't do anything else. Bret continues by saying that Goldberg is not qualified, but he was a star and they had to look the other way. When you go through the brain injury I have, you are lucky to be alive. Bret says WCW never understood the talent they had and dropped the ball with him. And in the end, only Eric Bischoff can answer answers to himself, apparently. Eric says by the end of 1999, he lost hope and was being disrespectful on purpose as he felt that he was always had Ted in his corner. Well, then the merger happens and Ted doesn't have as much control as he used to, and thus here comes Eric Bischoff being rode out into the distance. Eric says all the battling internally took the fun out of it for him, and the summer of 1999 was one of the worst periods of his life. He gets a call on September 10th, 1999, and he needs to call to Harvey's office. They inform Eric that he needs to go home. But Eric says that he has a pay-per-view on Sunday, and Harvey says not anymore. Eric was confused, but was also relieved. He wasn't disappointed and didn't fight it. Sullivan was shocked as Eric beat Vince for 83 straight weeks. And even with the head start that Vince had, the suits do give Eric credit for doing the impossible. Eric went home and told his wife he got fired. He jumped on a plane and went fishing. Conan gives Eric his props for the NWO, pushing the Cruiserweight division and pushing Goldberg. Nash says Eric put it all together. And people can say it wasn't his money, but he knew what he was doing. Sullivan put over bringing in Hogan, Nash, Savage, changing Sting. And Siegel says Eric delivered everything he asked him to. And they know Eric worked hard and stayed at it. So Eric Bischoff, the great hero of WCW. Yeah. So yeah, that was the streak is over. The next part was basically the let's rip apart Vince Russo for an hour with New Blood, as Vince Russo is hired and he was seen as the guy who was great at coming to the prominence in WWF as a head writer, but they basically gave someone like a 14-year-old car keys, thinking that he can drive a car, and he couldn't. Alex Powell says Hogan versus Beefcake was on pay-per-view, but this match couldn't headline pay-per-view. It's like, in hindsight, it's like, how do you not put Hogan and Goldberg at least a rematch on pay-per-view? Like, what are we doing? Russo basically wanted to make it like Jerry Springer, like hot shot booking, hot shot angles, sex sells, and all this other stuff. We get a lot of talking heads just shitting all over Vince Russo in this one, including, hold the phone, Bret Hart and Goldberg agree on something here. Bret calls Russo an idiot, and Goldberg is a little bit more direct, and he says that Russo was a shit stain. He feels Russo was there to kill WCW, and we see Seven staring at a little boy in a window, which, yes, was a thing that Vince Russo came up with. Kevin Sullivan took over for Vince Russo for a while after Vince fucked up enough times, and his first thing was to get back to the wrestling. Russo says that when Benoit, Malenko, Saturn, and Eddie Guerrero saw he wasn't there anymore, though, they decided that they were going to leave. And we go to the Radicals going to WWF at the start of 2000. And it was a sign that WCW, the tank fall is going, and it's going even faster. DDP and Booker T say that it was a big move for the Radicals to jump over because Chris Benoit had just won the WCW championship 15 days earlier. Russo says the ratings plummeted after he left and WCW hit rock bottom. Siegel notes all the decisions were made by him, and someone suggested to bring Eric back. He says his relationship with Eric was always good, and he felt bringing him back as a consultant was a good idea. So we get the New Blood Rises with Eric Bischoff and Vince Russo working together. And of course, that all falls downhill by Bash at the Beach 2000, where Hogan has his creative control and wants to use it. He wants to beat Jeff Jarrett or do his booking, and Russo doesn't. We also talk about, in between all of this, Ready to Rumble, which classic film. I might do a review of Ready to Rumble for our Patreon backers. So if you're a Patreon backer, check that out for sure. I might do that. Go back and watch it. And we see David Arquette winning the WCW championship. David Arquette was a nice addition to this whole thing too, because he talks about how he was being in the back and he was shocked and excited about winning the world championship. He wanted a tag team matchup pitting Eric Bischoff. Eric Bischoff had no problem with this choice to put the world title on David Arquette. Mistake number 10 by Eric Bischoff, because he's back and he's still making dumb decisions and agreeing with dumb decisions, apparently. And he has no problem with this until David Arquette is excited about it, until he asks Booker T, how many times have you been the champion? And Booker laughs and says, no, he's never been the champion. And David's tone, he said, instantly changed, says Booker. Guy Evans says that it was another nail in the coffin of a dying company. People were pissed an actor won the world title. And to make things worse, Vince Russo would eventually win the world title. So Booker also notes that David was one of his biggest cheerleaders, which is great. I love David Arquette. David Arquette was really well done here. So we go to Bash at the Beach, and Hogan did everything he could to protect his spot. Hogan laid down for Sting in the middle of the ring at Halloween Havoc 1999 and went home, and because he didn't want to work with Vince Russo, but he eventually came back when Eric was back as head of creative. He wanted Eric to be head of creative at the time too, but Brad told Russo that he was in charge of creative still, and it was 2 days before Bash at the Beach. We've covered that on the Bash at the Beach special on Dark Side of the Ring, so won't get into the minutia of it, but the whole big dispute between Vince Russo and Hulk Hogan, there's a plan in place that Hogan and Bischoff came to, so they leave after the whole angle goes down, and then Vince Russo comes out, cuts a shoot promo on Hogan, calling the big bald son of a bitch, and it leads to him stripping the world title of Hulk Hogan, and we get Booker T beating Jeff Jarrett to become the world champion for the first time. Vince Russo said bro about 15 to 16 times in this whole thing. It's very annoying. He says everyone online bought the story hook, line, and sinker. Everyone was happy to see someone put Hogan in his place. Russo says that this angered Hogan and his ego, and back to Eric, who says his phone and Hogan's phone were blowing up. Eric notes again that contractually Hogan had creative control. Going back to that, one of the first two mistakes that Bischoff made. He knew Hogan was done, as there would be a lawsuit. Guy Evans says that the fans were the most important and how WCW failed them by having the backstage play out in front of the camera. Russo notes he did the right thing because Booker deserved to be the world champion, and he claims that is far and away his greatest moment as Booker of WCW. Brad says Eric and Hogan were partners in WCW, and he was doing what he thought he needed to get it back on track as he sent Russo home. He had a choice to send Russo home, and he did it. Creative changes again, as Russo and a committee are now working together. Eric and Hogan are at home now and staying home for a bit, and they started to hit even more rock bottom. Russo is all over the television. Booker says he was brought in to be a writer, and he started to be on TV more than some of the wrestlers. Russo says the most outrageous line, which is saying something to this whole 4-part series. He says one of the most outrageous lines of the whole thing. He says, as far as being an on-screen character, I thought it was better than 90% of the roster. Vince Russo would eventually get fired from WCW. That's the end of that one. His last show was October 2nd, 2000, and he says that when he got let go, he was relieved, and he realized how much he hates the business, and it makes him depressed. Then he says that the same politics are still there today. That was New Blood. And then finally, we had the final Nitro. This one was good because we had a lot of backstage footage from the last Nitro from March 26, 2001. Eric Bischoff says things at Turner Broadcasting were more dysfunctional than ever, and that leads to the going back to 2000 with the AOL Time Warner merger, and we get all the sweet minutia with that whole thing. And WCW was no longer a hit every night. And Single says that he was trying to fix it and do whatever he could to get it back on track, but it just became more of a chaotic shit show every single day. This eventually, he talks about the difference between 1999 and 2000, where uncensored 1999 did 325,000 buys, and in 2000, the same show did 60,000 pay-per-view buys, and both shows were headlined by Hogan versus Flair, noting that they never wanted to push any of their young guys, and they had some of the best young talent out there. Another big mistake from Eric Bischoff. I'm running out of fingers for this shit. Eric says the narrative is that WCW had lost $62 million in 2000, and there is a grain of truth, but people don't understand the why. He thinks other divisions had losses, and they were pushing to WCW because he knew it could be written off there once the company was shuttered. Others back up that there was some truth to that, and Eric asked Brad Siegel to let him explore selling WCW. We moved to 2001, where January 11th, the FCC approves the merger of AOL and Time Warner, and it took a year to get the approval, and by that point, AOL had been being predicted as being DOA. They discussed the .com bubble exploding, which affected AOL, and the stock price dropped 50%. Ted was standing there to protect WCW, but he was given an executive role, only a name. And Brad said that Time Warner didn't need to own a wrestling company that was losing money. And then we get the bigger villain of it all, Jamie Kellner, who came in and became president of Turner Broadcasting. He was made the CEO, and Jamie credited with the growth of Fox Network and a founder of WB Network. And he saw Turner was a great company, and his goal was not to mess with things, but he hated professional wrestling, says Brad Siegel. So he wanted to get rid of it as fast as possible. March 6th, Brad sends a memo telling WCW employees that there would be a hiatus on the incoming. And a few days later, no hiatus, as wrestling is being canceled off Turner completely. March 9th, we get the Eric Bischoff announcing via telephone that next week's WCW Nitro would be the final Nitro and the last Nitro on Turner Networks. Eric Bischoff says that they were ready to close the deal as he found a buyer with Fusion Media to buy WCW, but Brian calls him and says that it was done. Eric thought that meant the deal was done, but he said it was off the table. Eric blames Kellner as he was the head dog and didn't want his primetime hours cluttered with pro wrestling, and WCW relied heavily on television. As Eric said, without TV, WCW was only worth $20. Hey, Vince McMahon, he basically bought it for that. He bought it for pennies on the dollar. Eric Bischoff said that they had a deal in place for about $60 million, and Vince McMahon and WWF bought it for $4 million. Stu Snyder, who was the former vice president of Turner Home Entertainment, he grew up loving professional wrestling, and he would have eventually become the president and CEO of WWF Entertainment. We even hear about Bob Ryder coming up with a conspiracy theory that Brad Siegel and Stu Snyder had an underhand deal to basically sneak out WCW from WWF for WWF. And all this nonsense is just a whole bunch of people who don't remember their own stories and don't remember their own life. We see a bunch of great finish behind the scene footage, and it's pretty surreal to see with referees and wrestlers asking what is happening on that March 26, 2001 Nitro. We even see Dustin Rhodes looking at a run sheet that says Vince McMahon vignette to start off the show. And we see Vince on camera on WCW television saying the fate of WCW is in my hands. And I remember being 13 years old, and being completely shocked by this. I was like, what am I watching? There were WWF signs in the crowd. Shane McMahon has a meeting with the staff and informs them that WWF has now owns the company, and they credit the boys for performing when out there in the ring. Booker says he and Scott Steiner had a conversation, and Booker said that they were auditioning that night, and we went out there and rocked it. Booker said he was excited that he had WWF eyes on him, but you had other guys like Nash who says it was pathetic that people showed up on the Titanic. He was happy to sit at home and watch the ship go down. They talk about the production guys and the girls who had been working for WCW and NWA for nearly 30 years. And DDP says, that's why I say, fuck you, Jamie Kellner. It's kind of rough because he just passed away. So photos of the production crew, and it does suck that they all lost their jobs at that point. Conant was shocked at how low the amount was that WWF paid for WCW, and Eric won't say spooky happened, but he says that he has his suspicions. WCW was generating over $20 million a year, and they were sold to WWF for $4 million. Some of the talking heads think it was an inside job. Kevin Sullivan thinks that maybe there was an envelope pushed across the desk, and Eric says Stu Snyder was executive at Turner and got a plump job at executive job with WWF. He already had that by the time, by 1999, when you were still doing well. And we talk about the Bob Reiner, who was a part of WCW.com as a host. He posted online that there was a conspiracy theory at play, and Eric calls Bob a good guy and a good friend, so he was probably feeding him this information. He just gave it away. Stu says that he had no advanced knowledge of the Fusion deal was going to fall through, and says that from his understanding, Keller was the one that wanted WCW off Turner. They note that that would be illegal with the FCC, and it would not be worth the risk of what they would lose. So, this is so frustrating to go through again. Stu says that the WCW wasn't looking to buy something and kill it. The idea was to figure out how they could keep it alive down the line. But eventually, Shane buys the company. They keep it in the storyline for a bit, but then they eventually kill it off. We get all the guys who would come over, all the guys that sat at home because they were collecting big money contracts. Like you get The Rock, who said he wanted to face guys like Sting, Goldberg, Savage, and the NWO guys. And Eric knows that when WWF bought WCW, they didn't get the contracts of the wrestlers. Some guys took the deals from WWF where they got 50 cents on the dollar. And Goldberg was like, that's not happening with me. I don't blame those guys either. If you could sit at home and collect millions, like, why wouldn't you? What the fuck are we doing here? We even see footage of Eric Bischoff joining up with WWF back in July 2002, where he became a good performer. He was a better performer, on-screen performer, than he was an executive. So they go around to all the talking heads, and they try to figure out who killed WCW. Dick Cheatham says Turner Corporate. Conan says the people in Turner that didn't like WCW or did like wrestling, and the top guys who held down the mid card. Brad Siegel says WCW killed itself as it didn't function as a team. We got Bret Hart, who says that it was Eric Bischoff and Vince Russo who had to be. It was two guys who shouldn't have been in wrestling and were telling guys like him who what to do. Booker says that the person with the checkbook, Eric Bischoff. Brett blames Eric and Russo, who had no knowledge of how to run a wrestling company. Russo says a business decision killed WCW. Goldberg says a shitload of people contributed to it. The Rock brings up downtown Bruno and how he told them one day you will hear a voice tell you the big run is over. And WCW heard that voice. The big run was over, but it was fucking awesome. Nash says that WCW was Eric's creation, and nobody else on this planet can say they beat Vince McMahon at pro wrestling. They have Eric watching that, and he gets very emotional, and he says that it means a lot to him, and he breaks down a little, and he says, cool, and he says that we were the number one wrestling company on television, and he closes by saying all the good and the bad. He was very lucky. I will say the final episode was probably my favorite episode of this shit-stained series because we got the backstage footage and a lot of the corporate mumbo-jumbo with the Fusion deal, with the Big Bang poster that was going to be the relaunch of WCW. So really good stuff on this, but man, oh man, this was a rough go. So here is the blame pie. 50% of the blame. I'm going to give 30% of the blame to Turner Broadcasting, Turner Sports. They did not like professional wrestling. And when Jamie Keller came in, he wanted to kill it off completely. So they deserve some of it, but they don't deserve a lot of it. They don't deserve the majority of it. So they get 30% though, because they got rid of it. 20% is going to go to Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon wanted to kill WCW, wanted to get rid of his competition, and did everything in his power to work against it. And he did just that. And he eventually bought it and killed it on his own television. So Vince McMahon's going to get 20%. We're going to give, now we're going to give 5% to the top guys in WCW. The top guys in WCW deserve 5% because they kept down the mid card as much as they want. They didn't think about the company overall in the long run when you really think about it. 10% is going to go to Vince Russo. He was already coming into a dying company, but he did his best with horrible decision making to kill this shit a lot faster and to speed up the gunshot wounds that they were bleeding out. And then the final 35%, the most percentage, goes to Eric Bischoff. Eric Bischoff, like Booker C said, he was the guy with the checkbook. He was the guy that makes the contract with Hulk Hogan that leads to our first iceberg of Hogan having creative control when you had this big arc that with the Sting versus NWO, Sting versus Hogan, that really was the first iceberg that led to everything. And honestly, if he's going to get, and I'm going to give Eric Bischoff 50% of the credit for what WCW would become. The other 50% goes to the 40% goes to the performers, and then 10% goes back to Ted Turner and Turner Sports. He deserves most of the percentage because the guy who gets most of the credit also deserves most of the blame. And we went through about 10 different decisions that led to the death of WCW. I ran out of fingers with the amount of mistakes that Eric Bischoff did in control. So you deserve most of the credit, Eric Bischoff. Believe it or not, I know you're all sweet and you're like cool to Kevin Nash did and this whole rehab project of how to babyface Eric Bischoff. You looking out into the sunset, being like, I did such a great job. I'm a great guy. I did all the things I could have done, and I don't deserve any of the blame. Bullshit. Bull fucking shit. As far as this series goes, I'm going to give it a thumbs down. This series gets a thumbs down. I felt like I wasted time. I had fun talking about it with all of you in the chat. You guys are awesome. TNC, who says, agree with USP3. Last episode was the best. Alex Powell, who says, it's funny how Russo says the ratings went up when he went there, but he fails to realize that ratings were back to where previous for a bit, as he also forgets that the pay-per-view went down as Starrcade was second lowest. Indeed. Alex Powell adds, Rock wanted to face Sting, but fails to realize that when he insulted Booker T, it made him not want to go to WWE. Exactly. But that's not The Rock's control. The Rock and Brian Guerrero wrote his promos, but Vince McMahon is the one that notified it. That's why Vince gets some of that blame pot for the death of WCW. So thumbs down for the series. Out of 10, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. Like I said, the last episode was the best episode. First episode, you got a lot of information about the rise of WCW, which was nice. The second and third episode, like I went through it within 5 minutes on this show, so wasn't much to get there. I knew all this stuff, and they covered most of this stuff on Dark Side of the Ring with either episode. So yeah. And the MVP for the series, I'm going to give it co-MVP to Booker T, who was great to hear from him and hear his perspective as one of the longest guys, tenured guys in WCW, and Bret the Hitman Hart, who was the realest on this whole shit. And LVP for the series is Eric Bischoff. Eric Bischoff, I am sorry. When you try to take away all the blame that you rightfully deserve for the death of WCW and then take most of the credit, you are a scumbag. And this is why I troll you on social media and leave big comments under your posts that you always seem to retweet or look at because I know you're looking at them. So here we are. 35% and the most blame goes to Eric Bischoff. Thus, he is our LVP for Who Killed WCW. Thank you guys. I appreciate you guys in the chat. TNC, who said, like your percentage blame for WCW. Thank you so much. Alex Powell, Cyclops, Ball B, especially, was chatting throughout this whole thing. G. Loke in the chat as well, who said Hulk had something to do with the fall. That's why I gave the talent some of the blame, but it's Eric Bischoff who made Hogan his number 2, basically. So he can give some of that blame. He could share the top spot with Turner Sports and give 5% of the blame to Hulk Hogan by himself if it makes him happy. But that is all for Who Killed WCW review. We might talk about it a little bit more tomorrow on the Flagship podcast. So join us live here, 10:05 a.m. Eastern Time, the True Hill Heat Flagship podcast, True Hill Heat 283, where we would discuss Dijak leaving WWE. We would discuss Solo Sikoa making himself the tribal chief and the awesome beatdown of Paul Heyman and Paul Heyman's all-time performance. We will talk about that. And Bo Dallas' amazing promo on Monday Night Raw, as well as final predictions for Forbidden Door. If you want our preview for Forbidden Door, check that out from yesterday with myself, Rob Wilkins, and Scott E. Wrestling, breaking down the card for this Sunday. We got our watch party tomorrow night as well, and we got our review on Monday at 1:05 p.m. Eastern Time right here. So stay locked. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the bell to stay notified for all the great content here. But until next time, guys, send a lot of super chats so I feel better about taking the time to talk about this shit show. This has been our Who Killed WCW review. We are signing off until next time.